Hey, what's up, U.S. history people? This is Mr. Norris.
And Mr. Lawrence.
And we have video number 1 for launching a new nation for you today. We're going to talk about the constitutional interpretation through the national bank. That's Alexander Hamilton's baby. All right, let's start off. Constitutional interpretation, actions, and customs. There's something called the two-term tradition of the president, and this really is no longer a tradition, and we're going to figure out what happened. Now, going back to George Washington, every president only served 2 terms and then was never elected more than twice. Something happens, and that is in the 1930s and 40s, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, he is elected 4 different times to the presidency during the Depression and World War II. So Congress changes the Constitution, and this is the 22nd Amendment, I remember, by 2-term 22. This was passed in 1951 that limits the president to only serve 2 terms in office. So the president cannot. It is illegal for the president to be elected more than twice.
So, Mr. Norris, what you're saying is that this started off as a tradition, but currently today it is law.
That is absolutely correct. It was a tradition, very good point, and now it is law because FDR decided to challenge that, and that's why we can't have nice things because of that.
Absolutely. All right, so number 2 is lobbying and lobbyists, something that's still started off as an early tradition and very relevant to today. And what lobbying and lobbyists are examples. Well, actually, let's give you some examples of a lobbying or a lobbyist. It's the idea that someone can influence Congress to make legislation to benefit their particular cause. So really quickly, what this is the idea that Congress members, such as your House of Representatives, your senator, or even people in the executive branch, this idea that they come to government with all these great ideas and they're going to create all these laws. Yes, they might have some, but a lot of these ideas for legislation come from what are called lobbyist groups. So some examples we have are the NRA, National Rifle Association, pro-choice, pro-life groups, environmental groups that exist today within 2014. So these groups go to members of Congress and they propose legislation. And if members of Congress like it, they will start to write up bills or laws based off those presentations. Sometimes they might completely disagree, other times they might accept it, and you might have a new piece of legislation as a result.
So what makes these people likely to have congressmen and women listen to them? What do they do besides propose laws?
Well, they have a lot of political influence, whether it's giving funds for campaigns, whether it's trying to go out and do get out the vote campaigns and try and get voters to agree with one side over another. These lobbyist groups can try and use their power to really influence politics.
All right, let's go to the president's cabinet. If you look in the Constitution, and hopefully you guys downloaded the Constitution app for your phones, nowhere in the Constitution is the cabinet mentioned. And the cabinet is members that are given the title of secretary of whatever department they are from. I like to use the example of a high school. Now think of the principal as the president of the high school. It's difficult for the principal to know what every single department is doing at every single time. So the principal will rely on heads of the departments, and for social studies currently that's Mrs. Woodlock. So they would rely on Mrs. Woodlock to give updates about the social studies department. Can you name 2 secretary positions and their purpose? Hit the pause button. Think about, do you know what 2 secretary positions are? And again, the secretaries, they advise the president and run the executive departments. And hopefully you mentioned Secretary of State. That's the most prominent one. They deal with foreign policy. And Secretary of Defense deals with the military. So those are just 2 of a couple different examples.
All right, so the 4th very important tradition that we developed early on in our founding is judicial review. And again, this is something that we have talked about quite a bit already and will continue to. So the question is, how did the Supreme Court establish this power of judicial review? Well, there's a specific court case. Hopefully you all know this already. It's Marbury versus Madison. And within this case, we see the Supreme Court really give itself the power to determine the constitutionality of executive actions as well as legislative actions. It's also very important to understand that Chief Justice John Marshall once again oversaw this case, and we're going to consider the Marshall Court, his time on the bench, is something very important, significant for bringing more and more power to the federal government as his time goes on.
So, Mr. Lawrence, judicial review is an example of what that we studied in the Constitution unit?
Would it be checks and balances?
I'm feeling checks and balances. Very good. Yeah, well done. All right, so now we're going to go to the economy. And the U.S. is in financial trouble in its early infancy. And part of the reason is they are in debt from wars. And you see here that it's $54 million that the U.S. is in debt. That seems like nothing. We're like $17 trillion today. $54 million, not a whole lot. However, At the time, it was significant. Today, it increases by about $4 billion a day, and $44,000 per person living in the United States would be needed to pay off. I do not have $44,000 cash. Do you?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
No, I'm just kidding.
So Alexander Hamilton was the Secretary of the Treasury, and he came up with a plan, and this is a 4-step plan to fix the economy. Number one, he wanted the assumption of state debt. And what that means is that the national government will consolidate or take all the state debts into one payment. So he went up to each state that was in debt and said, we will now assume or take over your debt and pay it off for you.
Number two was the creation of a national bank. So Hamilton wanted to create a financial institution for people to get loans and also to save money. So banks become necessary to have a proper running economy, specifically in a capitalist style society that the Americas will develop into.
The third part is the passage of an excise tax, and this is a tax placed on the manufacturer to increase revenue for the states. Now, it's very important to know an excise tax is a tax that is placed on domestically manufactured goods or goods within the United States. And any tax when we're talking about the government is designed to raise revenue.
And the fourth and final step was the issuance of a protective tariff. So once again, a tariff is a tax on imported goods. So the goal of this was to promote American products. That the protective tariff was issued to eliminate foreign competition. So the idea was if you bought a set of silverware that was produced in France, it would actually be more expensive because you had to pay that extra excise tax. So Hamilton was hoping, well, if you needed silverware, then you would buy it from an American producer because it would be cheaper. So again, that's why I referred to as a protective tariff. It was to protect American manufacturers, which would hopefully allow them to make more money, pay more taxes, and hire more Americans.
So both excise taxes and tariffs raise revenue for the government. What the difference is who is being taxed. Excise tax are American manufacturers. Tariffs are foreign competition. So let's go to more financial stuff. This plan he proposed will help the United States economy because it would encourage the buying of products made in the United States. Again, foreign goods become more expensive because of those tariffs. And also, it would help establish the credit of the United States, that bank in particular, and help get the U.S. out of debt. So those were the two arguments that Hamilton used for his plan.
All right, so some basic stuff we need to know about the Bank of the United States. So what is the role of a bank? Why would a person like a bank? And why would people not like banks? So just some specific questions to really think about as we go through this. So what was the role of the bank? Mr. Norris.
Two roles that banks play. The first is to store money, and the second is to lend money.
All right, so why would people like banks?
Because you can get money if you need it, and it's also a safe place to store it.
Okay, and why could there be some negatives of banks? Are there negatives of
banks? If I don't have any collateral or something to put up for a loan, then I may not get a loan, and they may not help me out. So I could be very angry about that.
Also, often, if you take a loan, do you just pay back the exact amount you borrowed?
No, you pay interest, which is even more money on top of it. Nobody likes interest.
Absolutely. So again, there's different perspectives on banks, and the idea that the United States government was going into the banking business, this becomes a controversial issue at the time.
So let's talk about the Bank of the United States, and here is a picture of the first bank of the United States. We're going to deal with reasons to support the bank and reasons to oppose it. Now, Hamilton favored this or advocated for it, and he said that it will help establish credit. He also said that it will help the United States get out of debt, and it would be an opportunity to invest money in the United States and help out long-term as well.
All right, so reasons to oppose the bank. This was more on the side of Thomas Jefferson. It was an institution for the rich, and poor would really not benefit. So if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of liquidity or actual wealth, let's say with money, you're not really going to benefit from having a bank. Also, it makes the government larger and gives more power to the national government. Again, this is the fear of those anti-federalists, that this is one more step, that the bank isn't specifically in the Constitution. So should the federal government have a role in creating a bank?
Now, think back to the last unit. What gives the government the power to make laws that are necessary and proper? You ever been interrupted during a video with a fire drill before? No? Okay. All right, guys, that is it for video number 1. Please turn to your video response sheet in your packet. And under video number 1, please answer the following question in at least 3 sentences. Why was the creation of the bank run by the government a controversial issue?